Hello and welcome to the ninth installment of Kalam Digest, our weekly news summary. But this week, so much has happened, we're doing it two times. And today is a very special episode because we're welcoming the newest addition to our team. I'm so delighted and honored that Nora Adin Fares would like to join us in this Kalam podcast endeavor. Noura, welcome to the show, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Edgar. I'm so happy to be here. I am a journalist, originally from Iraq, but also I grew up in Sweden. And I am currently based in Amman, partly to study my Fusha because it has gone terribly wrong over the years, but also to just cover the region journalistically.
Wonderful. We're so happy to have you with us. A
Yes,
gust of
welcome, Nora.
Yes, welcome, Nora, and welcome to you,
Thank
Sam,
you.
as well. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you.
Could you start us off with the quote that you ended last night's Munadama session on?
It was a success. Yeah, you like that one. It's what should we call it? A meme version of a classic Lenin quote.
Again,
There's
Lennon, yeah.
there's decades where we fuck around and weeks when we find out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Perfect. Okay. So
That is probably we're in the weeks right now, not the decades, it seems.
yeah, we're finding out. Obviously, we're making light of it now, but it's really terrible development with millions of people displaced and tens of thousands of people already dead, and we're on the verge of a regional war, which people fear could be like the start of World War III. A lot of unknown unknowns. But one thing that I do know is that Noura is in Amman right now.
Mm.
Noura, you witnessed the ballistic missile attack from Iran, and you filmed it. Like because everyone in Amman could see it, the missiles flying overhead. Could you tell us a little bit about what the vibes are in Amman right now?
Yes, of course. Actually, we were standing on my balcony, and so we could see basically everything that happened, and it did look like really, really bad. It started with like just one, two, three single missiles flying over the sky, and this was during prayer time. And then it was just followed by 10, 20, 30 more, and it just continued. So it was a never ending. And it took a little while before we started seeing interceptions in the sky from the other direction. And that's when we kind of realized that, the Iron Dome was probably working and doing, but it looked like it was happening over Jordanian airspace. And I think that this is the thing that a lot of Jordanians have been worried about, that when the war happens, it has to happen over their sky.
Yeah.
I've spoken to some people, and the vibe is kind of a little bit anxious, but at the same time, life is moving along just like normal,
Yeah.
because Jordan does have that peace treaty with Israel. So on one hand, people are scared that maybe they will be drawn in somehow because the missiles obviously have to fly over them. But they're kind of also feeling secure in the fact that this peace treaty that turns 30 years in like 2 weeks
Oh
with
yeah.
Israel. Yeah, it's I think it's 26th of October.
Mm.
They know that they have that in place, which kind of guarantees that they won't be immediately directly striked by Israel, at least.
Yeah. You were mentioning that different people were kind of like interpreting this in different ways, and a sense of security, but maybe also a sense of anxiousness. But um, obviously, like spontaneous eruptions, some spontaneous celebrations erupt in whenever Israel is attacked.
Exactly.
How is that? Like I saw we've been seeing videos of like Jordanian guys lighting cigarettes
Yes.
on burning missiles, or right? Or
Yeah. So there was one missile
It's
that
the
landed.
most Arab thing I've ever heard.
Did
yeah,
you see the
Like
clip
we
when
would
they were
celebrate by
dancing?
lighting our cigarettes on the
They were
debris from
dancing
the
on it
Iron
as
Dome and
well.
deceptions.
yeah. Sorry, Nora, what did you say?
Sorry.
Some Jordanians have also been dancing on one of the missiles that landed like right outside Oman.
Oh,
It was like a bunch of guys that just they kind of made it into a seat, and they were just smoking, dancing, having
Yeah.
proper celebration. There was big celebrations here on the mountain where I live in the area. Like people just started screaming out of happiness, and almost every car that was passing was honking, and that kind of went on for quite a few hours, which is very interesting in the sense because I feel like when the celebrations are brought up in media, it is just left there without any context, which kind of leans into the idea of, Arabs being this like evil terrorists that just enjoy watching another country being bombed without giving any context to the fact that, for example, here in Jordan, you have 60% of the population, they have Palestinian heritage.
Yeah.
That's more than the country's population itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, they are going to celebrate in some way that there is some resistance towards the Israeli occupation.
Yeah.
But when you just put it like that, oh, they are celebrating in Jordan or they are celebrating in Iran or whatever it is, it just plays into this idea that Arabs are just evil terrorists that enjoy when a Western country, quote unquote, is being attacked, which is really not the case.
I was thinking about that. So you said before that people are anxious about perhaps being drawn into this war, but I mean, as you said now, I mean, on the other hand, people must be kind of frustrated with, as you said, I mean, a majority of Jordan's population has Palestinian backgrounds. People must be kind of also, I mean, how is the government of Jordan coming across in this whole situation? They must be, I mean, since they're also intercepting, it seems that they are helping Israel intercept missiles from Iran, etc. Is there any kind of sense that people are critical of the Jordanian government because of the peace treaty, as opposed to being happy that it's in place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here in Jordan, there's been almost weekly protests, pro-Palestinian protests, which the government, unfortunately, have been cracking down on pretty harsh, because it is a direct inconvenience for them. It's within the Jordanian government's interest to remain a close ally, at least to the US, because they are also benefiting from funds and money that the US is directly giving them. And Jordan is also trying to somehow remain as this place in the Middle East which is safe for Westerners. And in that sense, having a war happening above your sky is really bad. But I do remember that when this happened, when the Jordanian military intercepted the Iranian missiles in April, a lot of people did see it as some type of betrayal, and they were very disappointed. And Iran also warned Jordan pretty quickly after that, saying that, the Iranian military is observing your every move. And if you keep on cooperating with the Zionist regime, then you might be the next target. And I think that is where the fear actually comes from now. It is not the fear that Israel will attack Jordan. It might be that in some way Iran might retaliate if Jordan intercepts or, works against passing these missiles through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in Egypt, the obvious, I mean, this is true for every Arab country, I think, but in Egypt, the popular sentiment is something like, my government won't let me, but if I was allowed to, like people, like taxi drivers, anyone that you speak to on the street, just, when you just mention Palestine, they're like, لو كان بإيدي أنا أول واحد أروح جهاد. You know?
Wow.
Do people say that openly in Jordan? Do people
Yeah, well, not exactly that. Here there is this like unwavering support for Palestine, and it's almost like it's impossible to grasp that Israel is allowed to be doing this.
Yeah.
And what I am sensing is that people here are really, really open with the fact that they openly support Hezbollah, or they don't support it. I've heard some people that don't agree with their actions necessarily, but they feel like it's nice that somebody is standing up towards Israel because their government isn't doing so. But it was actually so interesting because yesterday I was sitting at a cafe and I was overhearing a bunch of young international students sitting in different meetings. Like this was 3 different people that didn't know each other, having meetings with their universities in the UK and the US. And these universities are trying to evacuate them from Jordan.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which I find really like alarming in that sense because it's
Yeah, that is
actually like, it's
alarming.
not that bad.
Yeah, but I mean, were you kind of nervous? Like, do you guys know something I don't?
No, no, I really don't. I felt that it was kind of anxious. It's like
Yeah,
and it adds to this anxiety that I
yeah,
feel like a lot of like expats are feeling here, that
sure.
they're a bit nervous. I heard like some people were scared to even go out and look at the missiles during the Tuesday strike because
Mm,
they were scared that something might land on them. And
right.
if you have like schools telling them like you cannot be in Jordan, then that just
Yeah.
adds to the anxiety. But
That's
it's
wild.
really not that bad. Like it's really
Yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah. I can imagine. I mean, it's not. Jordan is like the stable country in that region, and it's constructed in that way, and it's in the US's best interest to keep it that way, obviously. But I'm wondering, Nora, if you could tell us a little bit more about like what the actual experience of watching the ballistic missiles fly overhead was like sensory wise, because I remember just turning on Al Jazeera and sitting like with my jaw open,
Mhm.
just like watching in awe this like spectacle overhead, because something that I didn't know that I found out from the Swedish analyst Aron Lund when he was on Swedish radio the other day is that this isn't just the biggest missile attack that Iran has launched against Israel. It's the biggest ballistic missile attack ever launched in the history of mankind. Um,
Mhm.
no one's done this before. So, like, what was that like watching this? Like, what did it sound like? What did it look like?
So honestly, I had such a surreal feeling watching this, and I keep on going back to the fact that it was prayer time, and
Mm,
it is there is I'm surrounded by like I think five or six mosques here, and one of them had a very long prayer, and you could hear that, and at the same time you just saw these fireworks flying over the sky, like some
Mhm.
type of fiery streams at the same time as this like very holy sound, very it kind of gives some type of respect to the event, and it also made it feel as if you were almost watching a movie. I felt like it was
yeah,
an unreal scene,
yeah,
and you also had this complete silence within the first 1 2 minutes, partly because of the prayer, but also because
Yeah.
people on the street were so shocked,
yeah.
and me myself included. And so it came in two different waves, I would say,
Hmm.
the missiles. And the first one was just really relentless and really strong. It looked like it was just fire streams just flying over the sky.
Mm.
And then when you started seeing the interceptions, which looked like some type of fire or light coming from Israel's direction, that's when we started hearing really loud booms. So it
Hmm.
wasn't, we could still hear that it was far away, but it was very clearly visible. And
Wow.
it was a very strange experience. I've never seen anything like it. It did look like some type of extreme firework or some a fire going on in the sky basically, and especially with these like loud booms going on.
Yeah. Could you
And
hear the booms, like not just from the interceptions from the Iron Dome? Could you hear them hitting Israel?
I think I had a hard time recognizing which ones that were being intercepted and which ones that were hitting Israel, but we were hearing booms during the entire attack. And I don't think that all of them came from the interceptions, because we could see clearly that some of these streaks of light would actually land somewhere or like
Yeah.
disappear behind a building, which means that they
Mm,
were really close to the ground.
yeah.
But at the same time, after a while, during the second wave, which I feel was maybe even more intense, because that is the first one started with just maybe three or four, and then it kind of escalated, whilst the second wave happened maybe 8 minutes later, was just a barrage of maybe 60, 70 at the same time.
Yeah.
And that is also when the interceptions were way more frequent from Israel, and that basically the entire sky was just smoke, fire,
Mm,
and things falling down.
wow. What a
Yeah, it was a
great,
really
what a,
crazy experience.
wow, wow. Well, okay, I think this brings us a little bit to something that we mentioned we should bring up, we should speak about, which is the fog of war. At this point, we don't really know the extent of the damage, or if any. I mean, if you listen to Israeli sources, not much was damaged, right? Like no one was injured, no one was killed, except they like to mention that a Palestinian man was killed on the West Bank, which is true. Um, uh, but other than that, it's there's a military censor. It's very hard to know. According to Iran, like half of the air force was destroyed and they hit all their targets. And according to Hezbollah, like even in the ongoing war in Lebanon, they're saying that they shot down a helicopter and blew up several tanks. So, what do we know? Like, Noura, do you have any insights on the extent of the damage?
I think this is so interesting because why would you not want to show the destruction somehow? That is a very interesting take to have. That there has been coming a bunch of stories and a bunch of sources saying that the Israeli military has told several media outlets not to publish anything about the damages that
Yeah.
might have happened within the country. And still, there have been some civilians posting things, but generally, we have no idea. But which is a very why would a country want to do that? Why don't you want to show the destruction, or is it that you're trying to make yourself being perceived as way stronger or undamageable somehow? So honestly, I have no idea. I've just
Mm.
seen some clips on social media where some locals were talking about how every window in their apartments in their apartment building basically shattered.
I saw
And
that too, yeah.
yeah, but I didn't see that on any news outlets.
No.
No.
I
I
have
mean,
no idea. I think this is very difficult.
Yeah. What do you
it's
think was the
interesting.
reason why Israel wouldn't want to show the extent of the damage?
I mean, I think part of it has to do with wanting to remain as invincible, or at least wanting to show the world that you are. I think they also want to maybe portray the Iron Dome as a system with zero flaws.
Mm.
And if
Yeah.
if the matter of fact is that they were actually struck and maybe struck a lot, then that would indicate that the Iron Dome can be overwhelmed, which they have been saying for a long time that it cannot.
Yeah.
Mm.
So perhaps it is something like that, but God knows.
I think it's. I
Yeah,
think. I
Sam, please.
mean, the fact that they don't want anyone to. I mean, we have these, as we talked about, we have these eyewitness reports and videos coming out, which are not republished by Israeli media outlets. Which is, I mean, to me, that's interesting. That signals that the military censorship, which every country at war will have, is working really well in Israel right now. They're not. I mean, no one's reporting on this. This is a huge news story. If they could interview these people, that would be a huge,
Of course,
scoop.
that's the first thing you do as a journalist.
Yeah, exactly. You would want to go find these people and talk to
Yeah.
them. But the fact that they don't even try to do that means I think they have a very efficient system in place right now to keep things silent around these attacks. And I think in terms of why would they do that? I mean, it signals two things, I think. The first is that they were hit. They
Mm.
wouldn't be going out publicly saying don't say anything
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that is kind
Yeah,
of
that's true.
embarrassing, in a way. So that means that something happened. I mean, or at least there were certain, I mean, a certain amount of impact. And the other thing is, it seems that Iran struck mostly military targets, because if they struck civilian areas, they would want to use that, to enforce the idea
Mm.
that they're the victim of this genocidal campaign, etc. But if they struck military targets, that's embarrassing to them. They're, as opposed to being kind of part of this, being able to describe their enemies as trying to just murder anyone, which I
Mm.
think is the same thing probably for the Hezbollah situation right now. They're very happy to report, any strikes that happen in settlements and villages in the north of Israel. But when Hezbollah says, we killed this and that many people, certain of those reports have been corroborated afterwards by
yeah,
Israeli media, because they can't keep it silent. When Israelis are dead, the families will want to speak up and stuff like
exactly.
that. So it seems, that is something that they're not bragging about that, or they're not publicizing it, because it shows that they're not invincible, which is, I mean, a huge part of Israel's whole way of dealing with the regional situation is trying to keep everyone convinced that there's nothing that could be done ever. And Hezbollah seems to already have shown that, I mean, that's just not true. And if you would have widely publicized stories about, of course, it says, of course, it's not true that half the Israeli Air Force or whatever is destroyed. That's bullshit. But I mean, major blows or major strikes at Israeli Air Force bases, for example, that would be, saying the same thing. Okay, we could do this. We could
Yeah,
we could
Mm.
actually damage them. If we
yeah,
wanted to, and would put pressure on all the other Arab governments, for example. You have Syria, you have Egypt, etc. These countries that are just basically trying to do whatever they can to not get involved in any way, whilst their populations are, as we talked about, 95%
Mm.
pro-Palestinian, saying stuff like, I would go fight if I was allowed.
Mm. I think the what's been corroborated is something like I think this figure was like 7 or 8 or 9 Israeli soldiers were killed.
9 is the latest
Nine.
figure, yeah.
9 Israeli soldiers were confirmed killed in when confronted with Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon.
Mm.
And like when Israeli soldiers are killed, it's almost like civilians. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
big deal,
Yeah.
and
they
you
have
know,
their faces and names and everything on the front pages being like, this really nice guy from this,
yeah, yeah,
university. How
You
could this
always get a
happen?
lot of detail as well about them. They like to
Yeah.
play the piano or they
Yeah,
love
exactly.
leather shoes.
yeah,
I mean, not to downplay of course, the human tragedy of anyone who's killed in whatever the situation, but it's kind of weird. In most countries, you would accept the idea that if you go fight in a war in another country, it's not a human tragedy, first of all. I mean, firstly, that's not the primary way to frame that. It's, maybe it's a hero. He died fighting for his country, but they have this almost like, how could this happen to this guy? He was so nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
which is really confusing, for someone who's not Israeli, I guess.
It plays into, I mean, it's kind of like a set press release for Western media to
Yeah.
immediately humanize the any Israeli killed, whether it's a soldier or not, or whether it's a soldier invading a different country.
Mm.
I do think that the Western media largely takes the bait. But which is, I think humanizing anyone who's killed is not necessarily a bad idea, but it would be nice if Palestinian and Arab lives would be humanized in the same way, or victims of
Yeah.
this war. But I guess when it comes to Lebanon, if we're going to talk a little bit about that, what Israel is facing is the difference between just launching airstrikes and raids and killing people in that way, and invading I mean, doing a ground invasion into a country that's been preparing for this since 2006 when they tried it last time, when a lot of Israeli soldiers were killed. And it's a mountainous region that Israel is not used to, and a lot of these, soldiers that are going in were not active in 2006. That's almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh, so what do you guys think is, I know maybe you're not military analysts, but what are Israel's chances, and what are Hezbollah's, chances, despite their command structure being decimated?
Sam, I think you should go first.
I mean, if you want. Uh, I I think, eventually Israel would win a war like this if they would go all in. But the question is, and this is the whole idea behind the strategy and the tactics of an organization such as Hezbollah, is they know that Israeli society is extremely vulnerable to casualties, even as we just spoke about, military casualties. So they know they will have, they could lose 10,000 men in a war. If Israel loses 500, it will be a victory for them because Israel couldn't keep up. They couldn't accept or take those kinds of losses,
Yeah,
which is, you know, it's horrible to even make those kinds of calculations, but that is, I think, the
yeah,
truth. And the fact that they have been repelled, and they don't seem to have managed to actually, as I said, manage. They could just just devastate the entire area and go in with like hundreds of tanks, and they would manage to cross the border, of course, but they haven't been able to establish any kind of foothold in southern Lebanon using the tactics that they thought would work. Is, I think, it's already a blow to Israeli self. Kind of, to Israeli tactics and strategy and their plans. And it seems to me, at least, that Hezbollah has gone from an organization which, for the first time ever, basically, or at least since the 80s, seemed to be not sure themselves, not, sure that they could do whatever they wanted. Just a week ago, they seemed to be, kind of panicking, and people were, crying in the street, and Nasrallah was, killed, and they couldn't, kind of cope with that. Publicly couldn't cope with it. To today, it seems to be an organization that is back on track with their usual kind of style, and as we just talked about, yeah, we blew up 5 tanks yesterday, and it's propaganda, but it's also kind of saying that they think they're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Uh, so I mean, and if they manage somehow, I think I would be surprised if they managed to do that, but it seems maybe they did, to kind of reorganize the command structures that quickly. I mean, then they have 50,000 men under
Yeah.
arms, many of whom have been fighting, which is, as we talked about the other day, a reason not to be, enamored with Hezbollah. I mean, they fought in the Syrian civil war, so they're very, very, they're veterans of very serious fighting, which is something that most Israeli soldiers are not, even though they do a lot of, terrorizing the civilian population on the West Bank every week. They that's what the Golani Brigade do. Normal week, they don't do like heavy guerrilla fighting war in, in an enemy country. So
Exactly.
I mean, they have a serious chance at actually inflicting heavy casualties on the Israelis, which, as again, Israel would win any war. They would just, if they would go all out and just try to kill people, they do that. But
They're not prepared to do that, so I don't think that's the vibe right now.
yeah. So I mean, the
No,
question is, could they actually sustain the losses? And I think
yeah,
probably not.
yeah. Nora, do you have anything to add to that, or should we?
Actually, just one thing. I remember speaking to a regional security expert maybe a week ago or two, Anders Persson, Mellanöstern expert,
Mm.
Middle Eastern expert. He said something that kind of stuck with me. He said that while the history has taught us that a war in the Middle East usually might start off well for a Western army, these groups, these armed groups, are really playing the long game, and almost
Yeah.
every long war that has happened in the Middle East has proven to be really bad for the Western country, regardless if we're talking about Afghanistan war, if we're
Yeah,
talking about Iraq, that it might look good in the beginning and as
Yeah.
if they are winning ground, but that won't last very long.
yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And speaking of Iraq, Nora, that's where your family's from, where you were born, and you mentioned earlier that Jordanians are frightened of being caught in the crossfire between Israel and Iran, and even being hit by Iran. I mean, Iraq is not in the same position because Iraq does not have a peace treaty with Israel. But when you speak to like your family and people that are in Iraq right now, um, are they nervous about the same thing?
So both yes and no. It's
Mm,
basically a little bit the same as where you have some people being very anxious about it, because you've also had the Islamic resistance in Iraq. They have aimed strikes at Israel several times, and a couple of weeks ago there was an Israeli politician that wanted to attack Iraq openly. Um, that didn't go anywhere because there is actually no reason to attack Iraq as a state like that. Iraq is really still very broken from the American war, and it is a country that is just starting to stand on its own feet. And actually, that's even too much to say. Like Iraq is really dependent on the money that it's getting from the U.S.
yeah,
And so I also know that the president of Iraq was recently in the U.S. trying to like keep some peaceful relations with Joe Biden. This was during spring, so I don't think that there is any type of indication that Iraq might be drawn into this. Iraq isn't strong enough to be drawn into this to begin with.
mm.
At the same time, I believe that there is a chance that uh, it could happen that Iraq is being struck and strikes in these like small areas, military bases. Maybe American interests would be hit in somewhere in Iraq, but I don't think that the country itself will be drawn into the war. And honestly, I think that people kind of know that.
yeah,
That's at least my impression when I've spoken to relatives.
yeah. Well, we certainly hope so. But in a way, Iraq is in a similar situation to Lebanon because there is the state, and then there are many different armed groups that maybe aren't as strong as Hezbollah, but they have their own group that's actually called Kata'ib Hezbollah, and
Right.
which I don't
Very
know.
confusing coming from talking about
It is
Lebanon.
yeah, it is because they're not connected at all, are they?
No, they're not.
No, I mean also the Kataib Hezbollah is like the two, the two ends of the spectrum in
Oh, in
Lebanese
Lebanon,
politics,
yeah,
like the Christian
Kataib, yeah,
fascists versus
exactly.
Hezbollah.
Yeah,
So
but
you
yeah,
have the Kataib Hezbollah, yeah.
exactly. But Kataib just means division,
Hmm.
Yeah, Falang. I mean,
yeah,
so that's where they took it from. They wanted to be
exactly.
fascists, but it just also means brigades or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all very confusing.
Yeah.
Well, should we wrap this up, guys? Is there anything else that you want to add?
I feel like we've blabbed quite a lot, actually.
Good blab, guys.
So happy to have you on board, Nora.
Thank you. I'm
Yes.
so happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nora. And we can just say as well that Nora and I are going to be developing some new seasons for Kalam podcast, and we're going to be doing some co-hosting. We have several seasons already like in the development idea stage.
Hmm.
One about Arabic divas,
Yes,
Kulsum and Fairuz.
we love
Another
them.
one about We Love Them, friends of the show. Another one about Sudan and the sort of forgotten conflict there, and many, many more things, culture, history, politics, Kalam podcast stuff. So super excited about that, Noura, and thank you for
Yeah.
joining us.
Thank you. This is great.
And thank you to you, Sam, and that's our show.
Thank you all.